Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me again. Back to Masechet Sukkah, and we're on Daf Mem Vav Amud Aleph 46a, and we're going to carry on the topic that we started last week. Now, the topic that we were discussing had moved into that of making brachot, and in particular, the Gemara was looking at the halachic requirements for making brachot on lulav and on sukkah. And the question really was, how many times does a person have to make the bracha? Is it enough to make the bracha on the very first time, the very first day of doing the mitzvah, or is it one that needs to be done every day? And we found that there was actually a machloket. And there were sages on the opposite sides of the argument spectrum. There were those who said that the lulav bracha is made each day as you take the lulav and esrog, but the sukkah bracha is only made the very first time you go into the sukkah, that is on the eve of the very first day of Sukkot, and then all subsequent days, whatever you do, how many times you come in and out or eat, you don't have to make a bracha again. Your first bracha at the beginning of the festival covers you for sukkah. And then there were sages who said the complete reverse, that when it comes to lulav, the bracha made right on day one is the only bracha you need to make. And even when you take the lulav and esrog on day 2, 3, 4, etc., there's no further bracha. But when it comes to sukkah, you need to make the bracha each time you go into the sukkah. Or shall we say at least each day. And the bracha you make on the first night doesn't cover you. So we had positions taken on opposite ends of the spectrum. And the Gemara also gave us the reasoning behind the rabbis who held both points of view. Those who held lulav 1 day, sukkah 7 days, or lulav 7 days, sukkah 1 day for bracha. The reasonings were given as well. Now, the Gemara then brought a braita, which seemed to follow one opinion, really only, and it asked a question. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen now, because in order to go further, we have to remind ourselves of that question. Second, just share my screen. If you remember, I set up this this table here on Word for you to look at. Now, what I've done is I've highlighted in red ink 2 lines, essentially, and we're going to have a look at those. The first one was the opinion of Rabbi Bar Chana in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Let's ignore lulav for the moment. Let's just look at sukkah, the sukkah column. And in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, the halacha was given that you make the bracha on the sukkah each day. That means all 7 days. And this is what we do. But remember, we're looking here at the formative discussions in the Gemara. So his opinion was it was all 7 days. But the braita over here, which is authoritative usually, said day 1 only. You only have to make the bracha on the sukkah on day 1. And day 1 really means night 1. When you go into the sukkah night 1, that's all you need to make as far as the bracha is concerned. And that's according to the braita. The problem the Gemara had was that it had stated that this opinion in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that it was all 7 days, was authoritative. And then the Braisa comes up and is quoted, which is also authoritative. In fact, it is historically more authoritative than Rabbi Yochanan's statement, which says day 1. And the Gemara couldn't understand how there could be that disagreement. There was a disagreement also as far as the lulav was concerned, but we were able to resolve the reason for that agreement. The Gemara could not find a reason for the disagreement on sukkah between Rabbi Yochanan, who says each day for 7 days, and the braita that said 1 day only. But let me just remind you what the svara was. What was the reasoning behind the opinion that you only have to make the bracha on the first night when you enter into the sukkah and not subsequently? Isn't that rather strange? So the reasoning the Gemara brought, which underlies this opinion, is actually very interesting, and in a sense will carry us through to the Gemara we're going to do today. And that is that the mitzvah of Sukkah is considered to be one continuous mitzvah without interruption. In other words, there is a mitzvah, leishev b'sukkah kol shivas yomim. One has to sit in the sukkah all 7 days. Now we know in practice we may go in and out, but the mitzvah is there, at least as far as eating and sleeping is concerned. The main mitzvahs are all 7 days. And the mitzvahs in the night as well as during the day, because in the night you're supposed to sit in the sukkah, sleep in the sukkah, and in the day you're supposed to hang around in the sukkah. So it's a continuous mitzvah without interruption. So the view that you make the bracha only when you go in on evening one is quite logical. It says that, this is one long mitzvah. You can imagine this is one long day of 168 hours. So when you go into the sukkah on the first evening, you're beginning that one long day, which is a continuous uninterrupted mitzvah. Whether you go in and out of the sukkah or not, that same mitzvah that was there on the eve of Sukkot is there on day 3, day 4, and day 5. And therefore, that one bracha you made when you first came into the sukkah should cover you all the way through, and you don't need to do another bracha. That contrasts with the lulav, by the way. On lulav, there is no mitzvah to take the lulav by night. And since there's no mitzvah to take the lulav by night, just see sharing for a moment, since there's no mitzvah to take the lulav by night, lulav is an interrupted mitzvah. Each day is separate because each day is separated by the night between the days where there is no mitzvah. So every morning the mitzvah starts afresh. So there it makes sense to say the bracha should be said each day. But on Sukkah, which is a continuum mitzvah, it makes sense according to this point of view only to make the bracha when you first go in. But again, we're still left with a problem that there is a brisa that seems to contest with Rabbi Yochanan's opinion, which the Gemara originally thought was also, according to some state in the halacha, should be a halacha, that the sukkah should be said all 7 days. The sukkah bracha should be said all 7 days, and which is what we do, by the way. We do not follow this brisa of day one only. So the Gemara wants to know, how can that be that the brisa says it's day one only, and yet Rabbi Yochanan says it's all 7 days? What leg does Rabbi Yochanan have to stand on, so to speak? Remember, if you have a Tanaitic statement, which is the brisa, saying day one only, that should be over and done with. It should be cut and dry, that every Amora has to hold of that, or at least argue why he doesn't hold of day one only. And yet Rabbi Yochanan says all 7 days without apparently any Tanaitic support. So it's a kasha against Rabbi Yochanan for holding a view all 7 days, which is contrary to that of a formal and official brisa, which says day one only. And the Gemara wants to know how we can extricate Rabbi Yochanan from this situation where he's opposing a brisa, and he should have been aware of that brisa. The usual understanding is that the Amoraim, including Rabbi Yochanan, were aware of every brisa, and they would not take a contrary position to that of a brisa, unless there was another brisa which supported them. And that indeed is what the Gemara is going to say. So now we're going to go back to the Gemara, and the Gemara, we carried on, is going to say, hey, there's more than one view in the brisa. It isn't just this brisa. There's another. If we look in, we'll see that there are contesting views, and Rabbi Yochanan is standing on fair ground by holding on to a different Tanaitic view. And as long as he holds on to a Tanaitic view, which is expressed, it could be either. It's up to him to decide which one he wants to hold on to. But when he says all 7 days, he's following another Tanaitic view. That's what the Gemara wants to say, and we'll see it inside now. And I'm going to take you to the Gemara after all that introduction. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I think it's 14 or so lines down from the top of 46a. The beginning of the line is Ella sukkah kasha. But surely we still have a kasha from the brisa against Rabbi Yochanan on sukkah, that the brisa says that the bracha only needs to be made on the first day, or really on the first night of sukkah, when you enter into the sukkah. And yet Rabbi Yochanan said that it's said all 7 days. So where does Rabbi Yochanan get his opinion supported? It's not supported, and therefore it becomes invalid if he's making a halachic view against that of the brisa. So the Gemara says Tanaihi. And Tanaihi always means that there is indeed a machloket of Tanoim on this, which we haven't brought. We haven't brought the machloket before. That there is one view compatible with having to make the bracha on Sukkah all 7 days. There's another bracha, another view which we've just seen, which says that the bracha on Sukkah needs to be made once. And Rabbi Yochanan is following the former view that it needs to be said all 7 days. But now the Gemara has got to prove it. Where is the Tanaitic machlokes in which Rabbi Yochanan follows one of the sages there, and he's supported? So the Gemara says, here it is. But we're going to make a leap. The Gemara is making a leap from Sukkah to Tefillin. In other words, the Gemara cannot find a Tana who supports Rabbi Yochanan that the bracha on the Sukkah should be made all 7 days, but it can find what it believes is a parallel. And we will find the position of a Tana in this parallel case, and Tefillin is going to be a parallel case, where it seems to be that there is a machlokus. Do you make the bracha continuously each time, or is one bracha at the beginning sufficient? And that is going to be the basis on which Rabbi Yochanan can support his view that on Sukkot you could make it all 7 days, or you should make it all 7 days. So let's see what this brisa says. The Tanya, because it was taught in a brisa. The brisa says the following: Tefillin kol zaman shemenichon mevorech aleihen divrei Rebbe. That's view one. When it comes to tefillin, every time a person puts his tefillin on, he needs to make a bracha on them, even if it's all on the same day. Now we have to place ourselves in the situation of the sages of the time who used to try and wear their tefillin on all day, not when we just come in for 40 minutes for tefillah and then take them off again, but where they used to wear their tefillin on all day. And a few tzaddikim still maybe do it today. A few of the gedolim you see with pictures being consulted during the day, and they still have their tefillin on. There's no small number in Eretz Yisrael particularly who do that. And the first opinion here is that of Rebbe, and he says that someone who's wearing his tefillin on all day, and he makes the bracha, of course, that you need to make before your tefillin, to lay the tefillin. Then when he has to do something, which means he has to take his tefillin off, maybe he has to go to the bathroom, or maybe he needs to do some shopping, or maybe he needs to attend to something, and he's busy with something which would be improper for him to continue to have his tefillin on at the time, then obviously he has to take his tefillin off again. But each time he comes back again, he has to put on his tefillin again. And he might do that 3 or 4 times a day. And if that's the case, Rebbe says that even though it's all on the same day, and he meant to wear his tefillin on all day, a bit like the sukkah really, it's all one mitzvah, nevertheless, he has to make a fresh bracha of lahaniach tefillin each time he puts his tefillin on afresh. The same way as Rebbe says that every day really is a new day. You're not covered by bracha number 1, source bracha, but you rather have to make the bracha each time. That's Rebbe. But this is the point. There's a machlokus. He only has to make it first time in the morning when he puts his tefillin in. The Gemara sees this as being a counterpart to the discussion over Sukkah. Do you make the bracha on Sukkah every day, which is every fresh start, if you like, or do you rely on the bracha you made at the beginning, even though you may go in and out and new days may come along your way? Rebbe says that you make this bracha every time you come back to put your tefillin on again. And that is going to be the support for Rabbi Yochanan, the Gemara suggests, that each day you need to make a separate bracha. And by the way, we make a bracha not just each day in the sukkah, but even if we come in for another meal a few hours later, having gone into the house, we'll make another bracha. We do so even more than one a day. But this view that of Rabbi Yochanan is supported by Rebbe in this brisa. Rebbe is a Tana, and that's fine. So now Rabbi Yochanan can state a bracha should be said each day for 7 days on the sukkah, and he is in line with a Tana Rebbe who says the equivalent in the case of tefillin. That's the Gemara's argument over here. Now there are some differences really between tefillin and sukkah, which it makes this comparison a little bit uncomfortable. But the Gemara over here doesn't seem to want to dwell on those differences. The wearing of the continuous wearing of tefillin is not really quite tantamount to the continuous mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah. Tefillin is a slightly different type of mitzvah. For example, most of us don't wear our tefillin all day. So it's a difference, whereas the mitzvah of tefillin does of sukkah is every time you should come back to the sukkah as much as you can. We don't have a mitzvah to put on the tefillin as much as we can. Rather, pious people, certain pious individuals do. There are some differences. Yet the Gemara wants to learn this as a model for Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan will follow the position where as far as tefillin is concerned, the bracha is made each time, and you don't rely on the original bracha you made in the morning. The Gemara is satisfied at this stage that we have found a get-out clause for Rabbi Yochanan to say all 7 days, which is the way we practice as well nowadays. And what we're going to do now is we're going to make a detour into the mitzvah of tefillin. The Gemara is quite interested in this, the mitzvah of tefillin, and what the halacha should be in tefillin, and some of the details. So this is one of those excursions that we find in the Gemara that takes us away for a moment from Sukkah into that of tefillin. So let's follow it now. The Gemara says, Itma, it was stated. This is, if you like, the transcript of a discussion which appears in the Gemara. Abaye Yoma, one of the sages, one of the Amorim said the following: Hilchos Rebbe. The halacha is like Rebbe. When it comes to tefillin, we just saw that there was a machloket. According to Rebbe, you make the bracha each time you put your tefillin on again, even if you've done this 5 or 6 times in a day. According to the Rabbanon, the other sages, the bracha is only made the very first time in Shacharis in the morning. So, leaving for a moment what the halacha is on Sukkah, the Gemara over here is exploring what's the halacha when it comes to tefillin. Is it enough to make the bracha just once, like the Chachamim? Or if you're one of those people who holds their tefillin on for much of the day, do you have to make the bracha each time you put the tefillin on again? What's the theory behind making a bracha again each time? I mean, the theory really is that there's what we call a hefsek, an interruption. Even if you say the mitzvah is a continuous mitzvah, and therefore maybe justifies only making the bracha once, even though you've taken it, put it on, and taken it off and put it on again. Nevertheless, when you take your tefillin off, there is a detachment. That's not just a physical detachment. In a sense, that's also a mental detachment from the mitzvah. And therefore, it justifies, according to the Chachamim, that you make another bracha when you put it on again. Even if you've just been to the bathroom or you've just attended to something else and you need to take your tefillin off, you make another bracha because you're now reattaching yourself both physically and mentally to the mitzvah. And that's why you would make another bracha. Because of that hefsek, it makes some level of sense over here, that you should make another bracha each time, that there is some sort of detachment. Even if the original mitzvah, in a sense, you could project through for the day, but in practice, you didn't accomplish that. And therefore, following an interruption, you should really make the bracha again. So that, just to give you the background to that particular point of view. In any case, Abai says the halacha is like that, like Rebbe, that you make it each time you put your tefillin on multiple times a day, even if it is multiple times a day, because of this idea maybe of hefsek, of an interruption. The Rava Amar, no, we have machlokes here on what the resolution of the Tanaitic machlokes is. How should we follow? Who should we follow in this machlokes and the Brisa? Rava says Hilchos Rabbanon, that you only make it once. You wouldn't have to make it multiple times. It's enough to make it once in the morning, Shacharis. Even if you take it on and off several times, that's enough. So this is Abaye and Rava in discussing Brisa on tefillin. And you see over here that Abaye and Rava don't agree. At this point, you can see it wasn't resolved because they disagree as to which opinion we should follow. Now, Omer Rav Mori said the following. Omer Rav Mori, Brad Devas Shemuel Chazino leila rova delo ovid kishmaitei. Rav Mori, the son of the daughter of Shmuel, very strange way of introducing Rav Mori with a woman in the, if you like, in the lineage. Rav Mori, the son of Shmuel's daughter, actually observed Rava. We'll talk about the naming in a moment. Observed Rava. Rava is just the one who said the halacha is like the Rabbanan, you only need to make it once. But Rav Mori once saw Rava in shul, if you like, or at home, and observed him. And what did he say? Delo elvid kishmaitei. And he never followed his own advice. According to his own advice, it's enough to make a single bracha. And yet, what did Rava do? His own halacha was that it should be like the Rabbanon, that's only once. But ela makdim v'ko'ayil, when he got up to go leveis hakisei to the shevutim, and then v'nofik u'moshe zimnacharina, and then he came and put his tefillin on again, and then went out. Oil leveis hakisei, he would do that again. V'nofik u'moshe day, and then he'd wash his hands and come back and monach tefillin u'mavorech. Each time he put his tefillin on again, he made another bracha. In other words, the observation was made. It's just interesting though. It's simply an observation that Rava, even though we have information about Rava, that he held that the halacha was that it's enough to make the bracha once, not like Rebbe, but like the Rabbanon. When he was observed, he actually observed doing it like Rebbe, which means that he made a bracha multiple times. The Gemara doesn't explain why. It's left open to our imagination. Why is it that Rava didn't practice what he preached, if you like? I mean, the simplest answer is that the statement made of the halacha of Rava, that the halacha is like the Rabbanon, you only need to make it once, was an opinion he once held. But he changed his view as time went on, and he was observed in his second view when he'd already turned to follow the opinion of Rebbe. And by that time, he was already making the bracha each time. And that therefore, even though we have an opinion expressed in favor of the Chachomim only doing it once, in practice, the sages that supported that view did a 360-degree turn. So it would seem that the opinion of Rebbe is almost held by everyone. And indeed, the Gemara now goes, no, let's just leave that for a moment, the next statement. The opinion as far as tefillin is held by everyone, that the bracha needs to be made each time, because there doesn't seem to be, so to speak, a surviving sage mentioned here who still follows the Rabbanon, that it needs to be made for all 7 days. We only have a 1 day. Each time you put it on and off, but rather you only have to make the bracha on tefillin when you first put it on in the morning when you're davening Shacharis. That seems to be the sort of conclusion. It's like Rebbe. That is the equivalent. If it's like Rebbe, you do it each time. That's the equivalent, therefore, of making the bracha every day when you go into the sukkah. In other words, this is one of the reasons our halakha is that you don't make bracha just once when you go into the sukkah on the first night, but you make it all the time, because it's in conformity with the opinion of Rebbe, which he pronounced in relation to tefillin. But it seems that his position in relation to tefillin is almost universally held. And therefore, we do the same as far as sukkah is concerned as well. And we make the bracha each time, even though it's a continuous mitzvah, as I said. And there's an argument to say you should only need to make it once. But we follow the view that there's some sort of interaction, if you like, between the episodes that you're in the sukkah and out of the sukkah, and therefore you should make it each day. And the Gemara actually concludes over here, for Anna, Nami Krebi Avdinan. We, who's we? But we'll see in a moment. We actually do this, that we follow Rebbe. Umavorichin kol shiva. When it comes to, therefore, the sukkah as well, we make a bracha each day for 7 days. Just as a note, what does it mean, and we follow Rebbe? Where's the we? We've been talking about different lines of sages before. Isn't this just a transcript? So who's talking? So over here, you need to understand that when the Gemara is a copy and paste and insert of all sorts of different levels of discussion, different generations, and in different yeshivot. It's probably the most global document ever written in the history of mankind. in terms of what it brings together. So this for Anan is the opinion of a very, very late redactor of the Talmud, probably not even later than Rabin and Rav Ashi, who are noted to be, so to speak, the final Amoraim editing the Gemara. This is probably an insert of one of the Rabbanon Savaroi, maybe around the 7th or even 8th century, much later, in which someone added a footnote almost. And by the way, who's we? Us, who are finally writing this footnote in Bovel. We follow this opinion of Rebbe as well. And when it comes to the Sukkah, this is what we do. And therefore, it's, so to speak, the universally accepted opinion after the Gemara really was sealed. Just very quickly on the side issue over here, we mentioned Rav Mori was described as the son of the daughter of Shmuel. Normally, you talk about the son of his father. Why the son of the daughter of Shmuel? Who's the daughter of Shmuel that she needs to be put into this sort of lineage? So the story brought elsewhere in the Gemara is that Shmuel, who was one of the great Amoraim, one of the early and great Amoraim, had a daughter, and his daughter was captured by the local Babylonians and held to a ransom, and she was held in captivity. And she was then released, and they had a son, and this son was born therefore to her, which is from noble lineage, but from a father who is not from noble lineage, but from one of the captors. And therefore, when she's referred to as Bito Shel Shmuel. She is the son. This son was Rav Mori. Rav Mori is the son not of his father, because his father was a captor, which is obviously probably a non-Jew, and someone who hadn't even converted, was a non-Jewish father. So rather mentioning Rav Mori Ben with his father's name, he's called Rav Mori, if you like, Rav Mori Ben Bas Shmuel, because the mother is the one who counts now, rather than the father, given that the circumstances of his birth of Rav Mori were rather unfortunate. That's why he's referred to here as Rav Mori, the son of the daughter of Shmuel. Okay, the Gemara is going to carry on now, talking about tefillin just for a little bit longer. And let's see what this paragraph teaches us. It gives us an extra insight. Amar Mazutra, when it comes to this idea of making the bracha more than once, which is the opinion of Rebbe. So Mazutra, who is an Amora in Bavel, hundreds of years after Rebbe, he says, Chazina Leila Rav Papi. I once saw Rav Papi, another Amora, a famous sage, to call Emas to Manach Tfilin, Mevarech. Well, there's nothing unusual about that. Each time he put tefillin on during the day, he made another bracha. Now, this is not so remarkable. We've just said this is the opinion of Rebbe, and it seems that almost everyone follows that opinion. And Rav Papi was observed to be doing that as well. Each time he put on tefillin, he made a bracha. And then Rabbanon Debei Rav Ashi, Mazutra goes on to say, I saw the rabbis in the base Hamedrash of Rav Ashi, the great final sage of the Gemara, and they did something even more than make a bracha each time they put on their tefillin. Kol emes demashmashibahu mavarechi. They made a bracha each time they fingered their tefillin, even while the tefillin was on them, and not having taken their tefillin off at all. So you see people do this and this to their tefillin, where they touch their foreheads, and there are various times when you touch the tefillin shel yad and tefillin shel rosh. And the Rabbanon Debei Rav Ashi made a bracha each time they touched the tefillin. Now, there are all sorts of problems in relation to this particular statement. The most blatant one is that How many brachas can you make? I mean, what bracha do you make? And isn't a bracha levatala? I understand you making a bracha each time you put your tefillin on, because then what is the bracha? It's lahaniach tefillin, to put on tefillin. And even if you're doing this 3 or 4 times a day, each time you are being meniach, you're putting it on again, and maybe you can justify another bracha. But when the tefillin are already on you, just because you kiss them with your hand, can you make another bracha? Isn't there a problem with saying a bracha in vain? We're not supposed to make excessive brachas. So what is going on over here? So Tosfos tackles this rather strange statement. Now, we don't do this, by the way. We don't do this. We don't do all this. We may do our touching, but we don't make a separate bracha each time we do so. But let's just see what the justification is. And I'm going to share my screen. There is a Tosafot at the side of the page on the left-hand column, the Kol Emes de Mashmashim Mavorachin. All I'm going to do is share the a larger version of it so you can read it with me. Again, it's not pointed. I'm sure there are pointed versions, but here's where we are. Tosafot. So let's just read these lines together. We're reading that paragraph. The Kol Emas de Mashmashi Mavarichi. That's the headline of Tosfos. Every time they touched their tefillin, they made another bracha. Why? The mitzvah lemashmesh bohem. Tosfos brings in this fact. There is a mitzvah to continuously touch your tefillin. And then what we do is we touch and kiss. But even if you don't kiss, there is a mitzvah when your tefillin are on you to touch the tefillin. Why? Shelo yasiach daito. In order that you don't divert your mind away from the fact that you've got tefillin on. Tefillin on are holy ornament, and a person needs to maintain a clean body and a clean mind when he has tefillin on. And you can only do that by being continuously aware of the fact that you have tefillin on. How do you create a situation of continuous awareness? So the advice that we have is that make yourself a habit of touching your tefillin, right? You know you've got tefillin on when you feel them. So that's the idea of being mamashmish. It's not because you want to kiss them and show your love. That's not the idea here. It's so that you can continuously remember you have tefillin on when you have tefillin. It's a memory jerker. That's what it's meant to be. How do we know that you need to be continuously aware you have tefillin on? Well, I said to you, it's common sense, really. It's a holy ornament, and therefore you should be aware. But the Gemara goes further and makes a remarkable parallel. Tosfos is quoting this. It's a Gemara in Yuma, where it says, Yalfinun mitzitz. We learn this principle that you need to be continuously aware of the tefillin from the din of the tzitz. The tzitz was the gold plate which was worn by the Kohen Gadol around his forehead, which had Hashem's name inscribed into it. And we say, Umar tzitz she'ein bo ela askara achas. He doesn't give you the rest of this quote. It's half a quote. Just the Gemara says, just like tzitz, which even only has one name of God hewn into it, the Kohen Gadol has to be continuously aware that he's wearing it on in order to validate the avodah he does in the Beis Hamikdash. How much more so a person wearing tefillin, which has multiple names of Hashem within the parchments, how much more so does he have to remain aware of the fact that he's wearing the tefillin? So the tefillin, the awareness of tefillin is learned from the awareness of the tzitz, of that plate, the gold metal plate. And here we have a lovely picture of the tzitz for anyone who's really interested. So we see he wears his hat on, his kova, and there is actually a metal plate over here, the gold plate, and it says Kodesh LaHashem. In fact, it would have had the Yud Hey Vod Hey rather than Lamed Hey, but it's Kodesh LaHashem, which means that he is holy to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Kohen Gadol has to wear the tzitz on when he does his avodah. The Kohen Hedger doesn't have this tzitz, but the Kohen Gadol has this tzitz. And he has to be continuously aware he has it on. So the Gemara in Yuma has made this remarkable comparison. How many names of Hashem do we find on the tzitz? Just one. It just says La Hashem. And he has to remain aware of it, even though it only has a single reference to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So a person who wears on tefillin, which has 4 parshas, which has maybe dozens of references to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the text of the and the parchments inside the tefillin, he should be multiply aware of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's even more important for him to know he's wearing tefillin on, because it's an even more sacred object, because it contains multiple references to Hashem. Now that's if you think about it, it's a very remarkable statement. I mean, in terms of pure numerology, it works. The tzitz has got one name of Hashem on. The tefillin has lots of names of Hashem on, and therefore, if you're doing a straightforward arithmetical comparison, you would say that the tefillin are more sacred than the tzitz. But it's a very strange comparison if you think about it, that the Gemara is raised over here. The tzitz is unique. It's worn by the Kohen Gadol while he's doing avodah. He's a unique individual. He's doing the avodah on behalf of the whole of Klal Yisrael. So you would expect the standards that he has to hold to be higher than that of the ordinary man in the street putting his tefillin on every day in the morning. Yes, so what are we? We're not Kohanim Gedolim. So for us to say, hey, if already he has to pay attention to its tzitz because it's only got one name, how much more so do we have to pay attention because we've got so many names? But it's completely different. It's apples and pears, because we're wearing tefillin on and we're ordinary people, whereas the Kohen Gadol surely needs to be at a higher level. So learning this, which is meant to be a kal v'chomer from the tzitz, it's quite a strange kal v'chomer, but it does teach us a lesson. And I think the takeaway we have over here is that every Jew is supposed to be, so to speak, at a very high level of commitment to HaKadosh Baruch Hu when he's davening in the morning, even when he has his tefillin on. Who says we're not Kohen Gadol? Remember in the Parsha it says we have to be Mamlechas Kohanim v'Goy Kodesh, a kingdom of priests. So we are, in a sense, priests. Even every person amongst us, in a sense, offers priestly service to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we're not so far removed, this particular drasha teaches you, we're not so far removed from the Kohen Gadol. And God expects great things from us as well. And just as he expects the Kohen Gadol not to lose his connection with the tzitz he has on his head, so therefore a Jew putting tefillin on in the morning shouldn't lose his connection with the tefillin. Okay, that explains why the touching would be done in order to remind us that we have the tefillin on. But what about the bracha? Let's go on and see what Tosfos says. So I'm over here, the low is parish. But it isn't explained in the Gemara, Maihu Mavorech. Let me just reduce the size of this. Maihu Mavorech. What bracha does the man putting tefillin on, who is touching it multiple times, does he make each time he touches it? Im Mavorchin Lishmoras Chukov, Kamosha Mavorchin Bosat Masalkin Tfiloso. Does he make the bracha Lishmoras Chukov? What is that bracha? Very, very rarely stated bracha. We'll have to go on and see what it is. Does he make the bracha that Hashem sanctified us in order to keep his statutes? Kamosha Mavorchin, as we make the bracha, Bosta Misalkin Tfiloso, when we take our tefillin off. Or does he make the bracha that we make when we put it on? Ola Haniach. Asheket Isham Tzvon Ola Haniach tefillin. Kamosha Mavorchin Bishas Hanacha, which is what we make when we put tefillin on. Does he say that 12 times if he takes his tefillin off 7 times and make the original bracha Ola Haniach tefillin? Kita Issa B'Hakometz Rabbah. Tohocha Hari. Tosfos says it's inconceivable, really, to say he should say Lahaniach tefillin. Tahacha hare menuchen v'omtim. They're already on his head and on his arm. So just because he touches them, surely he shouldn't have to make the bracha all over again. It would be surely a bracha levatala to say, I'm making a bracha to place my tefillin on me when they're already on him. It's a lie. If nothing less, it's a lie. And he's saying, I'm making a bracha to place my tefillin. He's doing no placing at all. He's just touching them. Umistabra, and therefore Tosfos says it is logical to therefore conclude to mevorchin lishma chukov, the bracha lishma chukov, kamo to mevorchin lishma bosat misalkin tfilaso. In the same way as we make that bracha of lishma chukov when we take off our tefillin. What is he referring to? He's referring to a bracha, which I don't think we say nowadays. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav, b'tzivanu, lishmor chukov. It may be lishmor chukov b'serosav or mitzvosav or something. It's something like that. We thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who's commanded us to keep his statutes, and tefillin is one of those statutes. Now that's not a lie anymore. If you touch your tefillin when you make that bracha, that makes sense, because each time you touch your tefillin, you're remembering that Hashem has sanctified you with a mitzvah. But you're not making the bracha to put the tefillin on, because you're not putting the tefillin on. So it would make some sense to say we make this bracha. Tosfos says that this is the bracha we make when we take tefillin off. I'm not sure whether it's a Yerushalmi or some other place mentions this bracha, but people used to, the men will know that we don't make this bracha nowadays. When we take our tefillin off, we're usually saying Ein Kelokenu, and then we're usually beginning to rush out of shul. We do not make a bracha, a bit like benching at the end of the meal. We don't make a bracha to conclude our wearing the tefillin off on and make this bracha Asher Kiddushanu. We do not make this bracha today. However, Tosfos is suggesting that the Rabbanon of Bei Rav Ashi, Rav Ashi's Beis HaMidrash, if they made a bracha at the time they were touching their tefillin, it's only conceivable that they would have made this bracha, because this bracha is made when tefillin are taken off at his time, and therefore, and it's not a contradiction to having them on you at the same time. It's just thanking the HaKadosh Baruch Hu for giving us the kedusha that his mitzvahs impart to us. So that's how the Mefarshim understand this piece of Gemara. Now, we don't do this, as I say. I think one of the reasons we don't do this is that we are much more concerned nowadays with the possibility of bracha levatala or bracha she'enot tzricha, making a bracha which is unnecessary, which is there's a big concern that this might be, taking God's name in vain. If you have no need to make a bracha, you don't make a bracha. We have a klal that brachas, mitzvahs bracha lahakel. There's a suffix in brachas. Did you make the bracha or not? You're usually lenient and don't say it again. If it's just left your mind, did I say the bracha or not? If you're not sure you made a bracha on apple before you eat the apple, and you're just about to bite, but you think, I think I made it, but I'm not sure, you do not say it again as a guarantee, because that might well be taking God's name in vain. There's a difference when it comes to benching, because that's a minat Torah bracha, but nearly all other brachas are rabbinic, and if you're not sure, you don't say them again. And given that's our general position vis-a-vis brachot, it's understandable that we don't even make this bracha of lishmor chukav every time we touch our tefillin. We're conservative and sparing when it comes to brachot, and that would make sense. Okay, now the Gemara is going to take us back into the topic of Sukkot again. Isn't that nice to know? We're going actually to take up lulav. Okay, so let's look at the lulav and the brachos there. Again, a lot of this is what we know already. The Gemara is bringing these things together because they're sort of a compilation of brachos type topics in relation to Sukkah and lulav. So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda said, in the name of Shmuel, mitzvot lulav kol shiva. And over here, we're talking not just about the mitzvah, but it's clear we're talking about the bracha, not just about the mitzvah all 7 days. He says the mitzvah of lulav is all 7 days, and we make a bracha there for each day. That's Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. And we make it each day. And we said there was a rationale for that, because each day's mitzvah is a separate mitzvah. The nights in between are not time for taking the lulav, and therefore every mitzvah is a complete new reincarnation. And it's not a continuation of the yesterday's mitzvah. It needs a separate bracha. Kol shiva. But Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Omar, he holds Yom Rishon mitzvahs lulav. Mikan ve'elech mitzvahs sekenim. It's using some very strange lashon over here. I can't apologize for the Gemara. The first day of Sukkot, the mitzvah, the lulav taking, is a real mitzvah. It's a mitzvah min ha-Torah. And this is something we already said outside the Beis HaMikdash. The other days, the 6 days onwards, mikan ve'elech, from day 2 to day 7 is mitzvah sekenim. is a mitzvah which was taught to us or instructed to us by our elders, which you couldn't take as meaning a mitzvah drabanan. And we said this, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai didn't want people to lose contact with the Beis HaMikdash even after the destruction. So we take lulav all 7 days nowadays, but only the first day is min haTorah, and the other days are drabanan. And according to the way the Mefarshim understand it, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi would be of that opinion, which we also mentioned, which is not the one we keep, which is that on the first day, therefore, only you would make a bracha, because it's min haTorah, and the other 6 days you would make no bracha because they're only drabanan. According to this opinion, they're only drabanan, and on the drabanan mitzvah we don't need to make a bracha. Now that I discussed last time. This one is not so clear, but according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, this is where he differs from Shmuel. Shmuel says that lulav you make a bracha all 7 days, and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says that you only make the bracha on day 1, and from day 2 to 7, you make no bracha. Now, we agree that ourselves today that the days 2 to 7 are rabbinical, but we still make a bracha. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's opinion over here is because they're rabbinical, we don't have to make a bracha on a rabbinical mitzvah. And therefore, you've only made it on day 1. Now, for Rabbi Yitzchak Amar, Rabbi Yitzchak says, Kol Yuma mitzvahs zkenim. He says something which the Gemara is going to catch out straight away because it's totally absurd. He says every day of Sukkot is a mitzvah zkenim, to use this losh, in other words, drabanan. Now that's totally absurd because no one in the world has previously told us that there's never any mitzvah min haTorah to take lulav. We all know that at the very least day 1 is min haTorah. It says "Lokachnu lachem miyom bayom harishon" in the pasuk. So it's only Shivas Yomim Lifnei Hashem. That's if you're in front of the Beis HaMikdash, but it's only day 1 min haTorah if you're not around the Beis HaMikdash. Days 2 to 7 there for our Zeicha, their commemoration and their rabbinic. But no one before has even dared to say that day 1 is rabbinic, and this is exactly what Rabbi Yitzchak is saying. He says, Kol Yuma mitzvah zkenim, even day 1 is drabanan. What is he doing with the pasuk that we have? Very strange. And of course, the Gemara recognizes that this is just an unacceptable view and needs to be explained or excused. So the Gemara says here, is it possible? Is he really trying to say that day 1 is also a mitzvah zkenim, Rabbi Yitzchak? This third opinion seems to be completely out of court. For Kaimalon, the Yom Rishon D'Oraisa. Everyone agrees that day 1 is min haTorah. How can he say that day 1 is also mitzvah zkenim? So the Gemara answers, no, you cannot accept Rabbi Yitzchak's opinion as stated. Amar, you should say that what did Rabbi Yitzchak really write? What did he really hold? Bar miyom rishon, except for the first day. In other words, re-edit Rabbi Yitzchak's words. We just read it as saying, Rabbi Yitzchak Amar Kol Yuma Mitzvahs Zkenim. Rewrite it and say, Rabbi Yitzchak Amar Kol Yuma Chutz Bar Miyom Rishon Mitzvahs Zkenim. Every day except for the first. So we got around the problem of Rabbi Yitzchak by twisting his language to mean the opposite. That the first day is min haTorah. Is that a chutzpah for us? We have a statement in the name of Yom Rishon of Rabbi Yitzchak that says all 7 days are rabbinic. We're not prepared to accept it. Whoever we are not prepared to accept it. So therefore, what do? We amend the words and say he really said every day is rabbinic except the first. And somehow we lost in our addition to the Gemara or in the tradition of Rabbi Yitzchak, we lost those extra words, except the first. And yet the Gemara is doing this, and it's very happy to do this, although the Gemara is going to ask a kasha on it for a different reason in a moment. It's happy to do this. Why? Because where you have an opinion which is totally at odds with anything ever mentioned before, and it's totally at odds with a literal reading of the pasuk in the Torah, then you have to assume that it was wrongly quoted. And the Gemara is very comfortable to assume it was quoted wrongly. And what he said was, every day is rabbinic except, those extra words, except for the first. The first is Minhag Torah. That's why the Gemara is happy to do this, doesn't have any qualms about amending the language. But the Gemara has another kasha now. It turns out that Rabbi Yitzchak is saying every day is rabbinic except for the first. But the previous opinion of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said exactly the same in different words. What Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, he said, Yom Rishon, it's a mitzvah, Minhag Torah, Mikan va'ilach, mitzvah sekanim. It's the same thing now as Rabbi Yitzchak. Now you have twisted the words of Rabbi Yitzchak. You've made him pronounce the identical halacha to that of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. The first day is Minhag Torah, the other days are rabbinic. This is the Gemara's question now. If you're really saying that you have to amend the text of Rabbi Yitzchak, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, it turns out that he said exactly the same as Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Well, is that a problem? Many people say the same as other people. Great minds think alike. Why is the Gemara worried about this? He says the same as Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, so what? The Gemara is worried about it because it seems it's understood. It was understood that Rabbi Yitzchak was in some sort of three-way discussions over here, although the debate was mentioned with all of them together. And when it's done like that, even if whether it was them or a subsequent generation, it's because it was meant to emphasize that there are three views here and not two views. Now, if you've only got two views for three rabbis, what's the point? And in any case, if they were saying the same, the Gemara should have said Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, the Rabbi Yitzchak, Amaru. They both said the same thing. But instead, the Gemara brings Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi to say that for day one's Minhag Torah and the next days are Drabonim. And Rabbi Yitzchak, Omar, but just in different words. Is it feasible that Rabbi Yitzchak is not arguing? Surely he must be arguing about something. So the Gemara answers, Amar, no. The Gemara is going to accept that they're not arguing. You could try and find a way they're arguing. The Gemara says, no, just accept they're not arguing, but change the statement again. Yeah, we're busy re-amending statements. Say, V'chein Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. You just have to add one word in, and the whole thing reads better. V'chein means and also. So now, if you were to look back again, it would say Rabbi Shimon ben Levi Amar, Yom Rishon Lulav, Mikan va'elach mitzvah sekanim, V'chein Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak says the same. Now, we have no problem with that. What we do have a problem with is when they're said as separate statements. Then it looks as though they're meant to be at odds with each other. But if you see V'chein, and he also says the same, that's fine. That works. So the Gemara is concluding over here that both Rabbi Yitzchak and Rabbi Shimon Levi hold the first day is Minhag Torah, and the subsequent days are Midrabanan, and that's exactly what we know as well, except that it would seem that the view at that time was they may not necessarily be a bracha on the subsequent days, at least according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, that there wouldn't be a bracha on the subsequent days because it's only rabbinic. Now, we do make a bracha on the subsequent days, and as we go on, we'll see the reason why we even make a bracha on the subsequent days, even though we accept that those days are rabbinic, they don't carry the same weight, and there are differences in halacha as a result of that. From the first day, the taking of lulav and esrog is on a different level of severity. Nevertheless, a bracha can be made even on mitzvah drabanan, yeah, I mean, indeed, when we say Hallel, it's also mitzvah drabanan. We make a bracha before Hallel. We make a bracha, as the Gemara is going to say in a moment, before you light Hanukkah candles, before you read the Megillah. All those are mitzvahs drabanan we make. So we make no difference. There's no apparent difference in our behavior between day one and the following days when we take lulav and esrog. Someone from Mars wouldn't know there was any difference between the mitzvah of day one and the mitzvah of the other 6 days. But there are differences, of course, we know as far as lending. If it's on day one, you have to be careful that it belongs to you. The other days you can give it and you can have it given back to you. There are various slight differences over here, which come down in halacha. But visually, we do the same mitzvah, we make the same brachot. Okay, let's just go on a little bit in the Gemara. V'af Rav Sova, Rav also holds kol shiva mitzvahs lulav, that you make a bracha on the lulav all 7 days. He's going to say, it says afra, but the Gemara is now trying to say that he holds you make a bracha all 7 days. And we'll see this. This for af doesn't make very good sense, because really it's not clear from before whether they were suggesting that the bracha should be made on the subsequent 6 days. Over here, the Gemara is almost taken for granted that it is. But after Rav Sova, kol shiva mitzvahs lulav, you make a bracha all 7 days on the lulav, as we do. De Amar Rebbe Chia, this is what is going to take us into another detour, which we'll deal with next week onto Hanukkah. We'll move on to Hanukkah. De Amar Rebbe Chia bar Ashi Amar Rav. Rebbe Chia bar Ashi said in the name of Rav, Hamadlik ner shel Hanukkah tzorich levarech. Someone who lights the Hanukkah candles has to make a bracha. And the Gemara is going to ask the question in a moment. Why should he make a bracha? Hanukkah candles are mitzvah drabanan. Weren't we busy before saying that it may not be necessary to make a bracha on the subsequent 6 days of Sukkot, because they're rabbinical, and rabbinical mitzvah don't require a bracha? So the Gemara says that if we look at Hanukkah as a model, we see there is definitely room to say and a view that mitzvahs rabbanan also carry a bracha in advance of them, and it'll be the same with the subsequent 6 days of Sukkot as well. As far as lulav is concerned, you'd make a bracha on those 6 days, even though they're rabbinical. And it's the same bracha, really, as a bracha you make on the first day, except the first day you make a Sheikh Yonu as well. But the bracha that you make on the lulav is said the same way. There's no different nusach. There's no different expression for the bracha between when we're making it on a rabbinical basis or on a Torah basis. And the next piece of Gemara, which we'll look at next week, is a famous piece of Gemara, which we find also in Sefer Shabbos and other places, which discusses the origin of saying a bracha on mitzvah drabanan. In other words, why do we make a bracha on a Hanukkah candle? When you light the Hanukkah candles, we make a bracha, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivonu lahadlik ner shel Hanukkah. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu sanctified us and commanded us to light the lamp of Hanukkah. And the Gemara will say, where did he command us to light the lamp of Hanukkah? How can you make a bracha which is explicitly inaccurate? This is more than a question of bracha levatola. This looks like a bracha l'sheker. Seems to be a lie. It's if we made a bracha that God has commanded us to follow the words of the sages who are telling us to light the Hanukkah candles, okay, fine. But we don't say that. We say, Asher kiddushanu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sanctified us, and he has commanded us. And we look through the 5 books of Moses, and we don't find anything there as far as the Hanukkah is concerned, or other mitzvahs rabbanan that we make a bracha, using that very similar phraseology. So we'll leave that for next week. And that takes us, that's a very fundamental piece of Gemara we'll be learning together next week. We just quit recording.